And so now I think we're going to take a second and get ready for Sheldon. So now you can put all your snakes away.
Thank you.
So Sheldon, I think we're going to turn it over to you.
Good deal.
About some frogs and toads.
All right. Can you see my screen there, Linda?
I can.
And can you hear the frog? All right, hopefully everyone can hear that and excited to be here. That's a tough act to follow right there, Jim, putting on a great show, and we're learning about some of our many wildlife species can be found here in West Virginia. Let's continue on with some of our cold-blooded animals that can be found here in West Virginia. We'll continue with our amphibians, or some of our amphibians. So we've been talking about snakes, and so those are cold-blooded vertebrates because they do have a backbone. They are cold-blooded, so they have to rely on the external environment to regulate their temperature. The next group that we'll talk about are our frogs and frogs and toads. And so we can talk a little bit about the many different wildlife species that are found here. And so first, I'm giving you some homework because it's Saturday afternoon, and what more can you possibly want is homework on a Saturday. And this homework is to go out and get to know the reptiles and amphibians that can be found here in West Virginia. Here's just two examples. And here is actually, that may be the same corn snake that Jim just showed you. This is my daughter, Alden, holding a corn snake at one of his mini events. And so these are one of our reptiles, and a little bit different. They're cold-blooded, they're vertebrates, they have a backbone, but they have scales that cover their skin. And here is one of our amphibians. This is a spring peeper that can be found here in West Virginia. So we've got two different groups here, and the study of these reptiles and amphibians is called herpetology. It basically comes from a Greek word that means these creeping and crawling critters. And so these are those that are found close to the ground, and they can climb up into trees and into vegetation. But these are those creeping and crawling types of individuals. And we'll focus on our amphibians. But this is your homework now, that you've got to go learn more about our snakes. And then we also have turtles and lizards and skinks here in West Virginia that you can learn about. Those are our reptiles. And then we can start learning about our amphibians. Those are our salamanders and our frogs and toads. And so amphibian means dual life or two lives. Many of our amphibians, especially our frogs and toads, their eggs are laid in water. They hatch, and they're juvenile, they're young, look like these tadpoles here. So these are actually upland coarse frog eggs, and this is a green frog tadpole. But you look, the juvenile looks very different than the adult. This is actually a gray tree frog, but you can see the difference between a tadpole and the adult version. So two different lives. The eggs hatch, they live in some cases, a few weeks, some cases a few years as a tadpole, and they metamorphose. So they basically change their physical appearance from the tadpole into the adult frog version. So that's the difference between an amphibian and a reptile. Amphibian is that dual life, spending part of its life on land, usually the adult version, and then part of its life in water, those juveniles. So let's look at specific groups of amphibians here. We'll look at our frogs and toads, and these are our neurons, basically. They look very similar in size and shape, but there are some slight differences between a frog and a toad. On the left-hand side, you can see a frog. Now, these kind of look like slick and wet skin. They have a little bit longer legs that are made for jumping. Compare that to our toads. Again, they kind of look the same in terms of their shape, but their skin is a little bit drier. They'll have a little bit more, larger number of warts on the skin. Their legs are a little bit shorter, so their bodies are a little shorter and stockier. But again, frogs and toads are very similar, just the appearance and kind of the feel of their skin, because these are kind of wet and they're really more associated with water and need to stay close to water. And then our toads that can handle a little bit more drier or a little bit more extreme areas. But these are frogs and toads. And in West Virginia, we have 12 different frog species and 3 different toad species. So like Jim was talking about, not all of these are scattered and distributed all over the state equally. So you may live in areas where you have a certain number, certain types of frogs and toads, and you may not see others that occur maybe on the eastern side of the state or the northern panhandle. So again, this is homework for you to get out and try to find and learn more about the frogs, toads, snakes, and salamanders that occur in your area. So, to get to know these, what do we need? What tools do you need? If we're going on a frog hunt, right? We're going on a frog or toad hunt. What tools do you need? Really, you can just walk out into your backyard. It doesn't take anything for you to go out and listen and look for what may be making these calls or these sounds in your backyard. Some are very quiet. Now, our snakes are not calling to us out there, so we may have to look under some logs and look in the vegetation to find these things. But just going out and looking and listening will help us find some of these frogs and toads. Other things you can take with you, it's always a good idea to take a friend with you. Maybe it may be your brother, your sister, your mom, dad, grandmother, grandfather, aunts, uncles, whoever it may be. Take someone with you, because it's always more fun to get out there with a friend and start looking for these. A lot of these frogs and toads are calling at night, and so we may need a flashlight or a headlamp to help us to get a better look at these things. It'd be a good idea to take a camera or your phone. Most everyone has a phone now that has a camera on it, so we can not only take a picture of what we see out there, or even record the sounds that they are making. A lot of our frogs and toads are found near and in water, so maybe some rubber boots. You don't have to. You can get your feet wet. It's a lot of fun getting out there. And some of these are very secretive. You can jump quickly when you get up close to them. So you may actually need a dip net to capture them, to get them up close and get them in your hand so you can actually see them. Now, you may not have to go very far, because this is a barking tree frog. It's not found here in West Virginia. I was visiting my parents down in Mississippi, and this one actually came to the back door looking for insects around the light at the back door. So they may come to you, but you can actually go out and find these in your backyards and in state parks, any type of area around West Virginia. So you need to know where to find them. And most of these are associated near water or moist, wet areas. So you're looking under, wet, moist, marshy type of areas, under rotten logs, maybe vernal pools, or these ephemeral pools that are only wet through certain parts of the year, or some of these large wetland areas that you see here, where at large ponds, creeks, wet areas where these frogs and toads may be calling. So where to look, and now we've got some equipment maybe, or just going out there to listen and see what we can find. But now you got to train your eyes. So we need to know what these things look like, right? Because in some cases, they can be pretty hard to find. They're very secretive. On the right-hand side, this one shows down a little bit better. This is actually a bird voice tree frog that was calling from a small bush down in Mississippi again. And here's a cricket frog. Can everyone see this frog next to the stick? So this is only about an inch long. From the nose to the tail is about an inch, maybe inch and a quarter. That's very small frog. And so you see how well they blend into the environment. So we can walk right by them and never see them. So we've got to train our eyes to know what they look like, where we can find them, so we can start looking and searching for these frogs and toads that are across West Virginia and in other areas. When you go on vacation or travel around the state or out of state, look and listen for those frogs and toads and other wildlife species that may be calling, can be found in those areas. So now, the great thing about our frogs and toads here in West Virginia, because sometimes they're hard to find, they do make very unique sounds, and we can identify our frogs and toads by the sounds or the calls that they make. So we'll give you a few examples here, and they can make some very interesting sounds. And when we start listening for these sounds, we may hear birds calling, we can hear insects calling. You've got to find what's actually making that sound before you can identify, okay, I'm putting this sound with that frog or this sound with that bird. So we can help identify them. So hopefully the sound is working. I've got a few pop quizzes for you today. That one, I gave you the answer for that one. So what, you've been out in your backyard these warm nights this past week, you've probably heard this peeping sound. Has anyone heard that? Let me see if I can bring the chat up. Has anyone heard that sound yet this spring? Does anyone know that frog species? Try to bring that chat up there. So that peeping sound is the peep of the spring peeper. Here it is. This is one of our chorus frogs here in West Virginia. Kind of been grouping the tree frogs as well because these toe pads, they're great climbers. This is only about an inch and a quarter long, making that peeping sound. And these are the males of these, the boys that are calling, trying to attract a female, that are calling out there. I've got a dog barking in the back. That's not a frog. That's a dog barking in the background. These are the males calling, trying to attract a female. So this is our spring peeper. It should be called in the time. You may hear it all into the summer and sometimes into the fall calling in wetland areas and in water sources. But let me see, has anyone heard this sound when they're out running around? This full-on trill. You hear that? You make that sound with your tongue. This sort of high-pitched trill. You may actually hear this in your flower bed, close to your home. So that high-pitched trill is the sound of the American toad. So we looked at a frog, and you can see the kind of the differences here between the frog and the toad. But the toad has that drier, warty skin, just making that high-pitched trill sound. And we can identify this as one by that high-pitched trill call. But we can also look at the spots on this back, brown spots. The American toad has one, maybe two, but one wart per spot. We have two other toads, the Fowler's toad, which will have multiple warts per spot, and their call is just a little bit different. But that's a high-pitched trill that we could probably hear. It may be calling now, but over the next few weeks, as the nights get warmer, we'll start hearing the high-pitched trill calling, those males trying to attract a female. All right, here's another one. You may have heard. If you have a dog, in the background, eating something, trying to throw it up, you get a bone or something that's something in his throat. That's what some people will So that is the American bullfrog. That kind of now maybe it's similar to another frog in the mix. Something different coloration depending on their genetics and the environment in which they're found, and the coloration of the water. They may be stained because of some of the water. But one thing to look at is this little fold of skin that goes from the eye over the tympanum. And remember, Jim was talking about the eardrum of snakes. Here's the eardrum of our frogs. Doesn't look anything like ours. Again, we're listening to those vibrations. But that fold of skin goes around the tympanum, the eardrum, and down over the leg. And they make that sound, I guess, the American bullfrog. Another one looks very similar. Have you ever heard this call? People will describe it as the fluttering a string of Those are two frogs to each other. One of our very common frogs. Now, this is the green frog. Again, it looks very similar to the bullfrog. That large tympanum, coloration is very similar. But if you look at the fold of skin that we pointed out, this fold of skin goes from the eye over the tympanum and straight down their back. So right between their back and their side. So if it's not calling and you catch one of these critters, they can be very similar in size, very similar in coloration. You look for that fold of skin, and if it goes over the tympanum and down, that's the bullfrog, or over the tympanum and down its side, that's the green frog. But if we don't have them in hand, and we just hear them calling, they sound like someone thumbing the string of a banjo out there. Or a dog packing up a bone. So those are the frogs species. These are true frogs that are found here in West Virginia. All right, one more example to listen to. It's a very neat frog. They're around a pond or a wetland area. It sounds like ducks are quacking. The ducks are talking to you in the background. You hear that? That's the sound. You hear those ducks quacking or talking in the background. That's the sound of our wood frog. Very neat species is found here. Another one of our true frogs can be found here in West Virginia. Again, different in coloration than our green or bullfrog, but size and shape, they kind of look the same. They'll have this black or dark color that goes through the eyes, kind of the black mask that goes through the eye, this white lip here. And you can look at that fold of skin that runs right down the back. If you hear something that sounds like our ducks talking or quacking on a pond, that's our wood frog. The first wood frog I ever found here in West Virginia actually fell out of the sky and landed on the hood of my car. I had it startled me because this wood frog just landed on the hood of my car. How did that happen? There was a raven circling above me that picked up this frog and probably tried to eat it. And somehow it got in the way and the raven dropped it and it landed right on the hood of my car. The frog was fine except for being startled, taken out of its natural habitat and landing on the hood of the car. But it was startling for not only it, but for me as well. All right, one more species that we'll listen to here. This one's not as common as some of our other species, like our bullfrogs and spring peepers. But imagine running your finger or your thumb along the teeth of a comb. If you're running your thumb right down the teeth of the teeth of that comb, you can kind of hear that kind of trickle sound like this. And these are some of our early callers, and just kind of sporadic around the state. So this would be a unique one that you can find in your area. This is our upland chorus frog. So we have two species of chorus frogs, the mountain chorus frog and then the upland chorus frog. It sounds like it's rubbing your thumb along the teeth of a comb. But you look at these two individuals. These are the same species that are making this same call. But you can see some of the differences here. They will have this kind of black triangle behind the eyes. This one doesn't show it very well because this pattern's a little more broken up. But you can see these three longitudinal lines that are going down this back. And again, you didn't know you'd be learning about frog lips today, but our chorus frogs have this white line on its lip. And so it makes this very unique call, has this white line on its lip, and our upland chorus frog has these kind of three lines that run down its back. The same species, they look just a little bit different. There's some genetic differences in those, maybe some habitat differences in there as well. But they'll all make that call that sounds like you're running your thumb along the teeth of a comb. These are some of our early callers that are going to be calling here in late February, March, maybe into early April as they go forward. So, very neat species. And so I just covered a few of them. We have, again, I said 15 different frog and toad species, 12 frogs, 3 toads that we can learn about here in West Virginia. And there are online resources that we can go in and actually learn about their calls. This is a great resource with the USGS Protected Wildlife Research Center that we can go in and take frog quizzes. And so it will give us examples of their frog calls, and then we can take quizzes to see if we can identify those frogs that they're playing recordings of. And so we can click on, we want to know in West Virginia, give us some examples to learn the frog and toad calls of our species found here in West Virginia. And then it will play clips of recordings and see if we can actually identify all the frog and toad species that are there. If you go into many of our wetlands or pond areas, you'll hear multiple species calling in the background. And so you've got to try to decipher which ones are calling and what all species are out there calling. So this is a great online resource. Again, giving you some homework and a possible pop quiz here on this Saturday, but a great resource for you to learn more about the frog songs, frog calls of West Virginia. There are other online resources of books or CDs that you can purchase, or there are free ones. Here's one out of North Carolina, and I have to pitch this because this Sarah Cross Owen is actually my wife. She was the herpetologist down in South Carolina and worked on the frog and toad calls of North Carolina a few years back. So there are some online resources, there's some books and CDs that you can purchase. If you need to know more about how to identify them by sight, there are some field guides to help you identify these. We have one specific here to West Virginia, which is an older version, but it still works in helping you identify what they look like and where they can be found in the state. Or we have some more general ones that just talk about the reptiles and amphibians of North America. There'll be a lot of species that don't occur here in West Virginia, but it will give you a good idea of what does. And they'll give you range maps to show you where they are. And some that are a little bit closer, but don't exactly cover just West Virginia itself. So got online resources and videos that we can learn about their calls, books that we can look in to help identify those. And most importantly, just get outside and explore. See what you can find, see what you can hear. Make sure that you're putting that frog or that sound to the actual species, the animal that's calling or making that sound, so you can put sight and sound together and learn more about the frogs and toads of West Virginia. I'll stop sharing there. Linda, hand it off to you.
Well, thanks, Sheldon. I mean, now that is really neat. And I love to listen to these calls and sit out on my porch at night and listen. It sounds like several of our participants have also had some toad and frog experiences. In fact, one of our participants has been taking care of a hurt frog, or a toad, I'm sorry. And Jaden had 2 toads, and he was pretty sure he could identify one of them before you said what it was. But he wants to know, what's the weirdest type of toad or frog that's out there?
The weirdest type, here in West Virginia, I don't consider them all weird. I think they're pretty neat. But you hear the sounds of our pickerel frog. It kind of sounds like someone snoring. And so if you're out around a pond and it sounds like my brother or my mom or dad or my sister snoring, that's our pickerel frog calling. So that's a neat sound. One of the photos that I showed you was the barking tree frog. And so it sounds like a barking dog. It's around the pond. So those are some cool frogs. And as you go, if you go beyond West Virginia and even North America, I've had the opportunity to travel in other countries, and I've seen some of their poison dart frogs, like that someone's bringing up in the chat there. And there are some cool, very interesting frogs that are around not only West Virginia but around the world. So here's some life lists now that you can start recording all the calls here in West Virginia. And then when you're on vacation or when you're traveling somewhere, start recording the frogs and toads that you hear in those areas. A lot of neat species that are out there.
Well, I think Oliver and Olivia and Ella were all talking about how different calls sounded like a bear or sounded like a dog. And I know we're coming towards the end, and I think we're getting ready to switch gears again. And this time we're going to take a trip to space here in a few minutes. But I want to thank you. And if this is your last or your only time that you're going to be on here today, don't forget to take our whatever you call it. I'm sorry. Yeah. And Margaret, if you want to finish it out, that's fine. But again, I thank Jim and Sheldon. I had fun.
Yeah, fantastic job. Thanks, everybody. And we'll start the astronomy one here shortly. Thank you.